You are tuned in to On Air with Chris Janafelt.
And we're a young team that is going to learn from these situations. And so I told them, you can feel tonight. That's okay. It's all right to feel tonight, feel bad, be pissed, all that. But once we get back at it tomorrow, we learn from it. We look ourselves in the mirror, including myself. We start with myself, and we see how we can get better, and then that's what we'll do.
Yeah, definitely. We got to regroup right away. Just got to come together as a team, no pointing fingers, which we did. We just all look within ourselves and continue to dig deeper. And we realize it's only one game. It's only one game. We can't let one game dictate the rest of the season for us. We got a long way to go. There's a lot of room for improvement. So for us, it's just to go out there, attack, and continue to get better and realize that we're that close. And when we get over that edge and we do the little things right, then we can really control games as an offense and take a lot of pressure off our defense. And I thought they played great tonight. So as a leader, just got to go back to work, push these guys, and make sure we're doing the little things and make sure everyone's still believing. And I know they do. So I feel like we're even though it didn't go away tonight, we're in a good spot moving forward. It may not seem like that on the outside, but we're coming together as a team, which is nice to see.
Welcome back On Air with Chris Janafelt. The first Sunday of the NFL regular season is officially behind us. We got a couple Monday Night Football games on tonight. And as you heard there, that was head coach Matt Nagy of the Chicago Bears and quarterback Mitchell Trubisky following a tough loss at Lambeau Field. I mean, last night's game was really a roller coaster of a game. The oldest rivalry in the history of the NFL, kicking off Sunday Night Football. The Bears get off to a fast start. They lead 20-0. The Khalil Mack show was on display, especially in that first half. In the second quarter, Aaron Rodgers suffers what looked like was could have been a serious knee injury and had to be carted off or not off the field, but had to be carted into the locker room after a sack by Roy Robertson Harris. Of course, Rodgers then would make the heroic comeback, and it really had a fourth quarter for the ages. It was the first time in his career he threw 3 touchdowns in a fourth quarter, and that was able to help big time the Packers, and they got the 1-point victory, 24-23 against the Chicago Bears. To help discuss the game from last night is a good friend of the show, Aaron Leming of BearReport.com, Windy City Gridiron, and on Twitter at Aaron Leming NFL. Aaron, really appreciate you taking some time as always. Again, I played a little bit of what Matt Nagy had to say after last night's game. I played a little bit of what Mitchell Trubisky had to say last night. What were your impressions on Matt Nagy's first game as an NFL head coach?
I thought the first half was pretty good. I was pretty impressed with what they did, especially within those first 2 drives. A lot of that, if not all of that, was scripted. And then things kind of bogged down, especially offensively. But I thought, maybe they'd kind of go in, make some, second half adjustments, come out and play better. And unfortunately, we just didn't see that. And I think last night it was a little bit of an eye opener as to what to kind of expect. I mean, this is a very new team overall. You got a new head coach. You got a lot of new offensive coaches in there. You've got a lot of new offensive players. You got some new defensive players. So I think ultimately it's just going to take some time. It's like they've talked about how much this is year one of probably about a 4-year type offensive system, and it definitely showed last night. I think Trubisky looked really good in the first 2 drives. He had about 100 yards. He only had that 1 missed completion, which I think ended up being a big factor in the game overall with that wide open end zone throw that he missed to Allen Robinson. And then after that, there was just a lot of smoke and mirrors, a lot of dink and dunk, and it was a little confusing for me because you hear Matt Nagy talk about how he wants to stretch the field, and that was a big point of emphasis all the way through camp and even in the preseason. But yet they run a ton of screens. I mean, there's 4 different players that had less than 5.5 yards per catch, and biggest concerning things to me moving forward that he really needs to address and be able to get over is him abandoning the run game. There was multiple third down opportunities, short third down opportunities that he opted to pass the ball. So I think overall it's just, I know it's a long-winded explanation, but there's definitely a mixed bag there. I think the offense definitely has a long way to go. I think the overall talent level definitely showed last night, but there's some concerning things that definitely need to get fixed, and I think we're going to learn a lot about this team next Monday and how do they respond against the Seahawks.
No doubt about it. Obviously, when things were still in the Bears' favor last night, Aaron, and emotions were running high, one of the guys that impacted the game right away was a guy that we've been talking about all week long since he became a Chicago Bear, and that's Khalil Mack. What a performance. I mean, a performance of the ages, a debut of the ages for Khalil Mack. As everybody has heard by now, he's the first player since 1982 with a quarterback sack, an interception, a touchdown, forced fumble, and fumble recovery in one half. And again, his first game as a Chicago Bear, there's a lot of questions as to how much he would be playing last night. How conditioned is he? How much of the playbook does he know? I mean, this is a guy that has missed all of training camp and preseason. But by the looks of it, how he performed last night, man, you could not, you weren't able to tell. I mean, I believe he played just over 40 snaps last night. I mean, when are we going to see Khalil Mack on every defensive snap that he can possibly play?
I think that time's coming soon. I mean, he played 70% of the snaps last night. I think overall he looked really good. That's kind of thing when you look early in the season, especially week 1, week 2. There's going to be guys that are going to bog down. That's just what it is. That's just how things happen. And I definitely think we saw that from the majority of the defense last night. And unfortunately, the offense didn't help out. But when you look at what Khalil Mack did, that's exactly why the Bears traded for him. I mean, you get a guy in Mack who comes out and disrupts every single game. And that's the thing is, you just talked about all those numbers there, but there were multiple times within the game where maybe he wasn't even credited with a pressure, whatever it was, that he affected the play in some way, shape, or form. I mean, from the very first snap that he was out there, he was in Aaron Rodgers' face. I mean, he was a huge impact, and unfortunately, even on that last touchdown to Randall Cobb, I mean, he was the one who almost chased him down in the end zone. And we're talking DBs that are faster and were way farther down the field didn't get to him, but Khalil Mack did. So I think really what you see in a guy like Mack is the culture aspect, and this is exactly why the Bears wanted a player like this. He's a leader in the locker room. He leads by example. He goes out on the field, and he's an absolute game wrecker. And I know that, I think the last real defensive player they had, not counting Brian Urlacher, I would say would probably be Julius Peppers, and Peppers definitely had a way of impacting games, but I think that because of how well-rounded a guy like Khalil Mack is, I think we're seeing a bigger impact. He's a little bit more athletic. He can do a little bit more. He's very good against the run. Obviously, a really good pass rusher that can attack you in multiple ways. I mean, he's the best defensive player that the Bears have had in a long time, probably going back to the days of Urlacher.
And speaking of Urlacher, speaking of middle linebackers, Rokon Smith was very limited yesterday. When he did get on the field, though, his first NFL snap was a quarterback sack. Big thanks to Khalil Mack getting pressure there as well. Rokon Smith, I mean, this is a guy that, Nick Wkowski had a really rough game last night. At a certain point, I want to say in the third, maybe early fourth quarter, it seemed like Aaron Rodgers was targeting Nick Wkowski. He knew that was probably the weak point on the defense. When is Rokon Smith, if you had to make a prediction, when will we be seeing him in the starting lineup?
I think it's going to be next week. I really do. I think it's going to be Monday Night Football, home crowd, all that stuff. The thing is, and this is something that's, unfortunately, we're reacting to one game. We're reacting the first game this season. We're reacting to a game against the Green Bay Packers, who have absolutely owned the Chicago Bears over the last, 10, 15 so years. So
17-4, I believe, is Rodgers' record against the Bears. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, that's a good point. So I guess my whole entire point here is for as much as we want to react to the one game, whether that's overreacting, whatever it may be, The big thing to keep in mind here is Aaron Rodgers has a way of making the Bears defense look bad through multiple defensive coordinators, and he's always done that regardless of how good the Bears defense has been. With that being said, Nick Wk1 was terrible last night. I mean, this is kind of the thing when you have good offenses that can stretch the field, that can get players going all over the place, especially when you're talking linebackers. You have Danny Trevathan, very athletic linebacker, guy who can cover. But when you have him making the calls and playing Mike, and unfortunately you have Nick Wk1 out of position at the jack position where he's going to be covering more tight ends, he's going to be covering the guys over the middle. He's simply not good enough to do that. He's not fast enough. He's just not athletic enough. I think he's a good Mike. I think he's somebody that over the next few years, if Trevathan does leave and you got Rokon Smith running the field as a jackbacker, I think that he can be a good Mike, but ultimately we saw how limited he was last night. And then you see Rokon Smith, he gets out on the field for 8 plays, 8 snaps. He has a sack, he has a quarterback pressure, he has 3 total tackles, and he has a tackle for loss. So it's just one of those situations where I understand what they're doing. I think part of it's kind of one of those, well, you didn't play at all in the preseason, you weren't there for training camp. We're going to bring you along slowly. We're going to make you earn your way. Well, I got news. After watching last night's game, I don't think there's one person that can make an argument for Nick Wk1. And I think that we saw that Rokon Smith is ready to go. He played the last, 5 or 6 snaps of the game last night anyway. This is a guy that's going to be playing next week. I would assume that he's going to be starting. He needs to be because he has a lot of speed. He's got that sideline speed. He's got he's got good instincts. He's got good coverage ability. He can also put pressure on the quarterback. This is just a situation where the Bears defense needs that. And I think that's exactly what's going to happen. And I think, on a bright note right there, between him and Khalil Mack and even Akeem Hicks, man, they have some star power on defense now. And like I said, unfortunately, when you get in a situation with the Packers always make the Bears look bad. They make the Bears defense look bad because Aaron Rodgers is one of the greatest quarterbacks that's ever played the game. But now we're going to see a stretch over the next 4 games where they're all very winnable against offenses that aren't that great, to where the Bears can really come out and showcase what kind of defense they're going to be. And I think Rokon Smith's going to be a big part of that.
Aaron, one of the Bears' biggest weaknesses or something that certainly was a cause for concern was the pass rush. Who's going to play opposite side of Leonard Floyd? Obviously, they go out and they trade 2 first-round picks and then some for Khalil Mack, and were somehow able to get a second-round pick back in that trade. What about the secondary, though? There seems to be some concern, lack of depth at safety. I know they brought in veteran Mike Mitchell today for a workout at Hallis Hall. We'll see what goes on with that. But specifically, cornerback. It was a rough day, a rough showing for Kyle Fuller and Prince Amukamara, who both cashed out big this offseason and were given some pretty hefty contracts. Any cause for concern with those 2 guys? It was more than one play, too. Of course, everybody's going to go back to the Kyle Fuller dropped interception, which he should have had, and I would like to think that, given that opportunity again, he would be able to hold on to the ball there. But this is Kyle Fuller we're talking about. He had a number of dropped interceptions a year ago. And then Prince Amukamara, we know he hasn't had an interception for, I believe, 2 full seasons, maybe 3 full seasons. And he got burned a couple of different times by Devontae Parker. Devontae Parker, Randall Cobb, both made very big plays for the Green Bay Packers, and it was against the Bears' top 2 cornerbacks. Any concern there with Amukamara and Kyle Fuller?
I think it kind of goes back to what we were just talking about not too long ago. Aaron Rodgers has a way of making the entire Bears defense look bad, and I think it's tough to put, to really quantify what happened last night. I read somewhere, and I can't remember where it was, that Kyle Fuller gave up 13 catches last night. He didn't look good. There's just no other way around. I think Prince Amukamara looked a little bit better, but even he looked a few steps behind. But unfortunately, when we kind of saw this last year too, where you're going to see those games where Kyle Fuller is going to have that bad game, and then he's going to follow it up with 2, 3, maybe 4 good games. And I think that's really what you have to expect right now. And Vic Fangio knows his defense better than anybody, is going to know it at this point. So, you definitely have to trust the fact that they wanted to keep Kyle Fuller around. But unfortunately, it's a lot different of a situation, at least in my mind, when you had Prince Amukamara on a $7 million deal last year, and you had Kyle Fuller playing out the last of his rookie deal, right? So you got maybe a total of $12 million invested in those guys. And then this year, you're looking at an annual average value of Kyle Fuller's making $14 a year, a little over, and then Prince Amukamara is making $9. So you've got $23 million tied up in these corners per year, average-wise. And you go out and you have a performance like that, and it's definitely concerning. The one thing, though, that's always been true about Vic Fangio's defenses is that his front sevens mean more to that defense than anything else. So, I mean, going back and looking at San Francisco even, I mean, he made a lot of those guys in the secondary. I mean, you look at Chris Culver was the only one. He was a second-round pick. Parrish Cox was I think he was a 5th or 6th round pick. Tremaine Brock was a 7th round pick. So, I mean, you look at what they had there, and they had a really good defense. So I think it's really just a matter of letting these guys get a little bit more on their feet, especially with the front seven, not keeping them out on the field as long. That's one of the things going back to the Bears offense where they've got to get better about at least moving the ball. Even if they're not scoring points on every drive, they need to sustain drives in order to give their defense a break. And it was almost kind of flashes of John Fox last year, I think, because you look at what happened and how gassed the defense got, and especially early in the season, you got to keep these guys level and off the field. And unfortunately, unlike the front seven, there's not a lot of depth at corner right now. There's not a lot of depth at safety. Marcus Cooper out on the field is not a good thing. They cut Cravon LeBlanc. I mean, they don't really have much depth there, and you look at safety, and it's not much better. So it's one of those situations where I think, as is, the Bears' defense will be fine, and they'll find a way to work it out. But, you start seeing injuries, and I think things could definitely change. So it's going to be something to monitor, but you really have to hope after sinking $23 million a year into these guys that they work out.
We're talking Bears football with Aaron Leming of BearReport.com, WindyCityGridiron.com, on Twitter at Aaron Leming NFL. Talking a little bit about the offensive side of the football, Aaron. I mean, early on, you pointed out kind of their scripted plays, their first 10, 15 plays of the game. There were some interesting formations out there. They started the game off with the T formation. Of course, 3 backs in the backfield. And, at one point you even seen Charles Leno Jr., the left tackle, split out wide. Seen that a couple of different times. That was probably one of the more weirder things I've ever seen by the Chicago Bears offense that I've ever seen. What did you make of any of these weird concepts that Nagy kind of implemented in last night's offense, especially early on when they're kind of able to move the ball while doing so?
I think some of it was okay. I think there was just a lot of smoke and mirrors going on because if you go back and you look at a lot of what they did, especially when they split Charles Leno out wide, they didn't do anything to move the ball. And the same thing with a lot of those screen situations where they would, dump it off to Taylor Gabriel. It's like Taylor Gabriel had 5 catches for 25 yards. He averaged 5 yards a catch. That's almost unheard of. I mean, those are running back numbers. Yeah. This isn't, this is a speedy receiver who, at least to everything that the Bears have said so far, he is supposed to be the guy, along with Tariq Cohen, that stretches down the field. He's supposed to be your vertical threat. They said that they needed somebody like that in their offense. They have 2 of those guys. And we didn't see either one of those guys do anything past 10 or 15 yards. So I think in some ways, that, Nagy got a little cute, whatever, and I think what happened was I think he got a little carried away, and I don't think this is something that we're going to continue to see, nor should we see. I don't mind the pistol formations and the whatever it may be, Tariq Cohen and Jordan Howard in the backfield at the same time, stuff like that. Okay, cool. But when you take it too far and there's so much smoke and mirrors and you're looking at the plays, I mean, Mitch Trubisky averaged, I think it was 4.7 yards a pass last night. I mean, that's not good. And that's something that I think the Bears are really going to have to figure it out. And like I said, I'm going to keep going back to this. They have to continue to run the ball. They have a good running back core. They have Jordan Howard, who averaged over 5 yards a carry last night. They had Tariq Cohen, who averaged over 5 yards a carry. Jordan Howard's still one of the best offensive players that they have on this team, and he showed that he had better hands last night, which is good. But they can't abandon the run, especially in these short yardage situations. They have a good offensive line. Their interior offensive line is very good. They need to own that, and they need to use that. And I think that's something that we're going to see moving forward.
I sure hope so, because there were times last night where I'm thinking to myself, you have Jordan Howard in the backfield. When is 3rd and 1? And I know, it's always easier said in hindsight, but when it's 3rd and 1 and you pass the ball to Deion Sims, who can't even move forward a yard running his route, just knowing you have a bell cow running back in Jordan Howard at your disposal, or even a guy like Benny Cunningham as a 3rd down running back. But, something you brought up, Taylor Gabriel, you mentioned it, 5 receptions, 25 yards. He only had 1 reception for positive gain, if I'm not mistaken, and it was the big 31-yard pass that he hauled in. After that, it was either no gain or he was being tackled behind the line of scrimmage. How about Trey Burton, man? I mean, it certainly looked like they were trying to get him involved in the offense. He was targeted quite a few times, but he only ends the game with one reception, 15 yards that came in the first half. Should we expect to see more out of Trey Burton next week against Seattle?
Absolutely. I think especially when you're looking at Trey Burton, I mean, this is a guy that they signed for $8 million a year, and he hasn't had more than 350 yards receiving in a single season. I mean, this is somebody that is definitely a projection, but they're expecting him to play a big role in this offense, and he absolutely should. And that's something that I think I think Mike Pettin threw him off a little bit last night. They talked about it. They were expecting man coverage most of the night, and after those first 2 drives, they switched into a zone. And Trubisky has struggled with zone throughout his 13 starts that he's had, and I think that's something that they're definitely going to have to get figured out, because and it's the same situation. You talk about Deion Sims. Deion Sims is not a good pass catcher. He had the one that hit him right in the numbers that should have been a catch down the field, and he had the one on 3rd and 1. It's like you're in a 3rd and 1 situation, and you don't even run past the chains. I mean, that to me, that just shows that he's not a pass catcher. He has no awareness on the field whatsoever. So I think part of this is the fact that Adam Shaheen was going to be a big part of this offense. They're going to run a lot of 2 tight end sets, and unfortunately, when you don't have that athletic freak like Shaheen, and obviously some of that's projection, but when you don't have somebody like that with the athleticism, it's going to hurt. And so I think that's going to be kind of a key for Trey Burton, is having those 2 tight end attacks to where they can be able to do different things. But I mean, he's somebody that he has to step up. He's a big part of the offense, and especially for a safety valve for Trubisky. I mean, we saw it in week 3. Obviously Chase Daniel was on the field, but we saw it in week 3 with Daniel, and we saw how this offense is supposed to run. And it's, when things are moving, it's a smooth offense. It's a quick pace, and that's another thing we saw last night that is a little confusing to me, and maybe it's just because it was a loud home crowd for the Packers, but they didn't get in and out of the huddle effectively. There were multiple times, I'd say probably 10 or 15 times last night, where I saw them take the snap with 2 or 3 seconds left on the clock, and that was something that was supposed to be a big pull for a guy like Matt Nagy, and even offensive coordinator Mark Helfrich. I mean, he ran those offenses in Oregon, those high-speed offenses. So this is something that I think it's just going to take some time to come together, but guys like Trey Burton are going to be a big part of this offense, and there's a lot of expectations behind them. So, I mean, these one catch for 15-yard games can't happen.
Well, if the Bears offense continued to have the success that they did in their first 2 drives, throughout the rest of the game, questions like this wouldn't come, but Nagy pointed out during the press conference the lack of reps in preseason, and he said, he's not using it as an excuse, but he did bring it up. What did you make of that? I mean, again, if the offense was firing on all cylinders throughout the entire game, no problem. He probably wouldn't have had to say that, but he said our guys didn't get a lot of reps in the preseason, and of course that kind of lit the media and the fan base on fire for a little bit, seeing as they had an opportunity to play in what they call the dress rehearsal game, which was against Kansas City, their first home preseason game this year, and none of the starters ended up playing. Caught a lot of flack for that, obviously. Of course, Chase Daniel and the Bears' second and third stringers and fourth stringers ended up playing very well and had control the entire game. But what did you make of Nagy bringing that point up last night?
You can't have it both ways. It's just that simple. And I'll be the first one to say I was in full support, and I still am, of Matt Nagy not playing the starters in week 3. I think that there's a lot of value to be had for a team, even going into week 2. I mean, we'll have to see. You know, it didn't sound like there was anything serious. Mukamura and Trevathan went out for a little bit, came back in. The same thing with Akeem Hicks, and he came back in as well. So there's a lot of value in the fact that they will have a relatively healthy team for week 2. I mean, just look at what Seattle's going through right now. I mean, they're not going to have Doug Baldwin. He's got an MCL sprain. So just that value alone is going to help them. I think a big key coming into the season is keeping healthy, and they came in with a healthy team last night, which the Packers were not, and they almost beat them. If it wasn't for one or two mistakes, they would have beat them. So but once again, you can't have it both ways. You can't say 3 weeks ago that, you know, basically tell everybody, you can't tell me that 20 to 25 snaps is going to make a difference one way or another, and then come back and say, well, we haven't had enough snaps, but I'm not using that as an excuse. Well, you definitely are, because if you weren't, then you wouldn't have ever brought it up. I think, and it's understandable. I mean, this is somebody who has very limited play calling experience. He's only an offensive coordinator for 2 years. He's coming from one of the better coaching trees out there in Andy Reid's coaching tree. But this is also somebody who is still young. He's still relatively new altogether for, you know, having a lot of responsibility with coaching. And I think there's just been a lot of whirlwind. And I think maybe things got away from him a little bit last night. And I mean, I can't blame him. Even going through today, I mean, it was a very, I wouldn't say emotional because that's a little dramatic, but it was a very frustrating day. So I can definitely understand. I mean, you get out to a 20-point lead. You're thinking, okay, you know, things are completely in hand here. Things seem to be going well. And the next thing you know, he gets smacked in the mouth. You lose on a last-second touchdown to Randall Cobb for the second time in 5 years, and here you are. So I understand, but to me, you can't make as big of a statement as you did 3 weeks ago after that week 3 preseason game, and then come back and say, well, you know, I'm not using it as an excuse, but we didn't have that many snaps. Well, that's a call that he made, and that's a call that he needs to stick by.
Last night's game was very reminiscent of Nagy's last meaningful game as a play caller when he was with the Kansas City Chiefs in that wild card round of the playoffs against the Tennessee Titans. First half, it looked like the game was really put away, to say the least. And again, second half, I mean, offense was really struggling to move the ball down the field until maybe mid to late fourth quarter for the Bears last night. And again, I mean, I believe the Chiefs last season led the Titans 21-3, 20-3, and ended up blowing that lead, losing the game by 1 point. Again, a couple more questions for Aaron Leming of BearReport.com, WindyCityGridiron.com. Aaron, moving on to next week, they're playing the Seattle Seahawks, Monday Night Football, another primetime game. And I think that a lot of people still think that this is a Seattle Seahawks football team that was a contender year in and year out. That's just not simply the case. You're missing Michael Bennett, you're missing Richard Sherman, Cam Chancellor on that defense. Earl Thomas reported to the Seahawks last week and actually had an interception yesterday, but the Seahawks still found a way to lose the game against the Broncos despite forcing 3 interceptions out of Case Keenum. What should we look for the Bears to improve on next week? And is this going to be an easier test for the Bears, in your opinion, than what they had last night with Green Bay?
I think when you look at the schedule right now, and through the first 6 games, I think the Packers and the Patriots are their only really 2 games where it's like, man, these are going to be tough. Now, that's not to say that I think that the Bears are going to roll over every single other team that they play, because I don't think that's very realistic. But what I am saying is I think that these next 4 games that they have Seattle, they have Arizona, Tampa Bay, and then they have Miami coming out of the bye. I think those are all very winnable games, and all starts this week.
It has to be like that with the athleticism.
So it's just one of those situations where I think you you look at what's going on. You say, okay, I watched the Seattle game. I watched most of it. Seattle wouldn't have been in that game if it wasn't for the fact that Case Keenum threw 3 interceptions, and they still couldn't overcome that. Seattle's not the same team that they were. There's a lot of internal strife going on. They've offloaded a lot of the guys, like you said. Michael Bennett's not there anymore. Richard Sherman's not there anymore. Chancellor and Cliff Averill. I mean, their careers are over with. I mean, this is not remotely close to the same team. Now, they still have some good offensive pieces. They still have Russell Wilson. But I think when you look at it, the big thing that stands out to me that should be a good thing for the Bears is the fact, man, that the Seahawks offensive line is Swiss cheese. Russell Wilson got sacked 6 times. Could have been more than that. Von Miller had a huge game. And I think that's really where the Bears are going to have to key in on. Like I said, Doug Baldwin's probably not going to play either. Brandon Marshall's probably going to be their top receiver. I mean, he had a decent game, but I think this is a game where the Bears can sit back and they can get on track. It's not going to be an easy game by any means, but I think it's a very winnable game. And I hate to sound dramatic in this situation, but I think this is a game that the Bears really have to win, because if they don't, then this is going to be the 4th year that they've started 0-2. You're going to start getting that here we go again feeling. I think if you get a win here, it's very possible that they can go 2-2, 3-1 before their bye week in week 5. So this is a very big game. It's going to be at home. It's their home opener. I think fans are going to get up. They're going to be there. I think there's going to be a lot of excitement there, and ultimately I think the Bears are going to end up pulling it out.
I'm glad you finished your statement off by saying that, Aaron, because Chris Collinsworth last night of NBC, he goes, this game, as in last night's game against the Green Bay Packers, could set the Bears back 100 years. And while he may have been exaggerating, I do feel that this is a game, and Trubisky in his post-game press conference said that, they're going to move right on, and he has no doubt that the team is going to be able to forget about this loss and focus on Seattle next week. While I don't think it'll set them back 100 years, I do think that, as you said, not trying to be dramatic or anything, but this is it is a must-win game, especially with the outcome of last night's game being what it was and how everything went down. Now you're coming back at home, another primetime football game against the Seahawks. Time to start getting things rolling, man. I mean, great start to last night's game. Now you gotta show the nation, gotta show everybody that you can play that way all 4 quarters for the game. Aaron, really appreciate your time. Thanks so much for joining us. As always, before I let you go, please tell the listeners where they can check out your work at.
Yeah, you can find me at Bear Report. You can also find me at Windy City Gridiron, doing about 2 pieces for both sites. Bear Report is subscriber based, but if you're a Bears fan and you like the inside content and a whole bunch of other fun stuff, then it's definitely worth a subscription. And then you can also find me on Twitter at Aaron Leming 1M NFL. So yeah, I'm always active on all 3 of those, and always enjoy talking Bears.